All right. I'm going to start right on the 5 minute mark. I'll see you guys in exactly 10 seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. So there was a point where Logan Paul and Jake Paul ran this entire town of Los Angeles. And I'm talking about within the social media side of things. If you remember, they had this little diss track that they had on each other. And by the way, I didn't even really know any of this because, quite frankly, I'm not 12 years old during the time of their heightened YouTube career or Vine career or whatever it is that they do. One thing I could tell you about Jake Paul and Logan Paul is that, yes, they are combat athletes based on the fact that they were YouTubers second. And they were just kids that grew up in Ohio doing wrestling. And the next thing you know, they get into this world of YouTube and influencer and social media and all this other stuff. But the reality is that these guys at heart are fighters, regardless of how you feel about them, regardless of your opinion on their lives and how they live their lives or how they decide to want to do it. Did you guys see that riot? Let's just get right into it. Now, I got to tell you, this is literally what I had expected to happen because of the fact of how heightened the entire event was. The fact that, let's just be honest, right? Dylan Danis knows how to attract chaos. It's a gift and a curse in a weird way, meaning that it's a gift because he was able to obtain such a high profile fight the way that he did right now. And then on top of that, he managed to create chaos once again in the same way that he did in UFC 229 with Khabib. Once again, becoming the wrath of someone's rage. I'm going to play to you guys the video that I had made just today, actually, regarding Dylan Danis. And I want you to tell me if you see any type of predictions when it comes to, let's say, the fight or the event that was similar to anything that I had said that was, well, here it is. I'll show you guys right now.
In this beautiful morning of fight day between Logan Paul and Dylan Danis. So I want to talk to you about what it's like to get hit on the head with a mic and having to fight the next day. Now, I know what it's like to get in a cage or get in a ring and fight someone the next day after a weigh-in, but it's a little bit different when, let's say, somebody hit you over the head with a mic. Okay, now why is that different? Well, because now you're creating a psychological edge going into that fight. You got to understand how.
So speaking of psychological edge, right? As you guys noticed in the fight, there was a couple of things that I had noticed in a way that, let's say, Dylan Danis was operating. For one, I thought that in the very beginning, he was a little bit hesitant and not really engaging, probably because of the fact that he wanted to prove that he was the better combat athlete. And how do you do that? Showing that you're a lot more patient, which is exactly what he did. A lot of jiu-jitsu guys fight exactly like this. They're very patient. They're not going to be highly explosive from the get-go, unless, of course, that is their jiu-jitsu style, and only which is influenced by wrestling. Because as you know, wrestling is just a very high, fast-paced, explosive sport. Whereas with, let's say, jiu-jitsu, it's a little bit more methodical, patient, which I thought was the game plan that he was trying to do. Also, here's another thing I'd noticed with Dylan Danis. He looked like Joshua Clottey when he fought Manny Pacquiao. If you notice how Joshua Clottey tried to fight Manny Pacquiao, it was just like this the entire time. And then he had a little bit of a peekaboo style, and I'm talking about Dylan Danis in this fight. And what exactly did he try to do with that? Well, not much, right? He wanted to lure Logan into, let's say, the type of fight where he was going to tire him out. And was that what happened? Not necessarily, because eventually it showed the experience that Logan had over Dylan Danis as a boxer. Now, Is Dylan Danis more of an experienced combat athlete? 100%. But we're talking about boxing specifically. And even Jake Paul, after the fight, he said, ain't none of these MMA guys could hang with us because boxing is what we do. But furthermore, on this particular video that I did this morning, and I want you guys to see if there's any parallels to that in terms of what had happened in the fight tonight.
How much it hurts to get hit with a microphone and the type of mental damage that you're going to have to go in there with. Now you're thinking to yourself, this guy is capable of this. But the other side of it, you also got to understand is that it's just a boxing match, right? Which, by the way, I find very interesting why this is a boxing match rather than, let's say, a mixed martial arts fight. Because the way that I see it, a mixed martial arts fight is literally a street fight with sanctioned rules, meaning that there's very few things that you're not allowed to do. Like you can't bite a person, you can't kick them in the nads, you can't do anything illegal.
Yeah, and guess what? Dylan Danis literally did all those things that I had just mentioned, right? Because, like I said, this fight was way too personal to ever make it just a boxing match, right? To make it a boxing match, there has to be something at stake. And what exactly is that? Well, some of the things that are at stake is, let's say, a world title, a title eliminator of some sort. None of that was going on with this at all. It was just beef between two social media influencers. One guy is somewhat of a boxer, an influencer boxer at best, and the other guy is a world jiu-jitsu champion, part-time MMA fighter based on the fact that he's only had 2 fights in MMA. But furthermore on this video,
such as like hitting them in the back of the head. Other than that, everything is on limits. Getting elbowed, getting kneed, getting hit with someone's back fist. All this is just in a
so this is literally the reason why I wanted to show you guys this. Back fist. Did Dylan Danis do that during this fight? Yes. A lot of it was just based on the fact that mixed martial arts is a free-flowing type of fighting system, whereas boxing is a little bit more strict and niche in terms of what it is that you can do and what it is that you can do. And it's one of those things where, you know what? Dylan Danis was totally out of his element. And because he was out of his element, this is what he had to resort to. And you saw what you saw if you saw the fight, because obviously if you're watching this, you definitely saw the fight and you know exactly what I'm talking about. The entire thing kicked off in a riot at the end of the fight, right? He tried to take him down. And right after he took him down, I noticed Logan Paul even threw like a ground and pound shot from the bottom, sort of like what you do from an up down position. And if you don't know what an up down position is, it's where a guy is standing over you and a guy is laying on the ground in sort of like on his back in a jiu-jitsu position. And Dylan Danis tried to kick him with an up kick. And by the way, wearing boxing shoes on top of that. And Logan just went and basically gave him a ground and pound. And next thing you know, just like the famous words of John Anik, all hell breaks loose and a riot ensues, right? So,
reality of mixed martial arts. And quite frankly, with the magnitude of this beef that they have going on, yeah, it should have been a mixed martial arts fight, but they did say they will fight mixed martial arts, according to Logan Paul when he shook his hand in that little face off they had going on. So now the other interesting thing is that Dylan Danis is seeing all these people from his past due to Logan Paul. For one, he brought in Chris Hansen, and I thought to myself, okay, there's some psychological edge to that. Because I'll tell you, growing up, I've seen Chris Hansen on TV. We know what he's about. We know what kind of content he does. And what exactly is that? Well, the type of content he does is that he goes after predators, people that are nunces, people that are pedos, that are chesters and whatnot. Okay, but the problem is now you're trying to depict Dylan Danis as that. So no wonder he hit you over the head with a mic, because you got to imagine, right? Being called that is one of the worst things that you can obviously be called to, right? Because you can go to prison for murder, you can go to prison for robbery. And by the way, speaking of robbery, I'm in Hollywood right now. If you guys don't remember, one of the biggest bank heists in the history of mankind took place here in North Hollywood.
How about the biggest robbery today with KSI and Tommy Fury? It's a robbery in more ways than one with KSI and Tommy Fury. For one, it's a robbery because of the fact that Tommy Fury was deducted a point. He hit him in the back of the head. Crazy enough, I just mentioned this right here on this particular video about how in mixed martial arts you can do everything except punch in the back of the head or kick them down there or whatever, right? But he got deducted a point right away, and it only took KSI to complain to the referee. So I let you tell me who you think is running that entire show, because guess what? A lot of people always complain about how certain boxing matches are ran by certain people. Oh, Canelo has the judges, Eddie Hearn has the judges, Floyd Mayweather has the judges, and all these things, right? Well, you sort of saw it play out in the way that you did tonight. So make of that.
Would with that little North Hollywood shootout they had going on, but that's neither here or there. The point is, you go to jail for any of these things. Nobody in jail is really going to go after you unless maybe you're a rival gang member or anything like that. But if there's one thing that police, the COs, the prisoners, and the gang members have in common is that they just don't mess with child molesters, and with good reason. Now, when you go and you accuse somebody of something like that, and then you bring in Chris Hansen just to amplify everything, on top of that, Logan Paul also brought in, what's this guy's name? The bouncer in New Jersey at the Jersey Shore bar that choked out Dylan Danis. He brought him in there. Speaking of choke, he also brought in World Jiu Jitsu champion Gordon Ryan, who, by the way, is literally the Floyd Mayweather of Jiu Jitsu, which makes Dylan Danis, in that sense, sort of like the Canelo of Jiu Jitsu. But nonetheless, he's his rival. He brings him there to Manchester, England at the weigh ins. And I'm thinking to myself, well, Logan, you got to understand something, right? You can't bring Gordon Ryan in there with you. And then on top of that, it's a boxing match. It's quite useless to bring him there, but I get it. I think I know why he brought him in there. Reason being, because of the fact that he's shocked with getting hit with a microphone on his head. And that's going to bring some kind of psychological damage to you, thinking that, wow, this person is capable of anything.
So I got to tell you, okay, the way that Logan Paul approached this match before, he's mentioned something to the effect of, well, I forgive you, Dylan. And the reason being, Ariel Helwani mentioned on the booth during the commentary that he wants to look at this from a very methodical and technical point of view, rather than a point of view of hate, anger, and resentment and things that are just not going to help you in a boxing match. I don't think those types of things will help you in an MMA fight either. None of those things will help you in a combative situation at all. What does help is trying to approach things in a much more technical, smart, efficient type of way, rather than doing things in a sloppy way that can be caused by your emotions. And he came into that fight doing exactly that. Now, with Dylan Danis, he came into this fight almost in the same kind of way, but had different intentions, because he knew that he just didn't have the skills to match Logan Paul. And then on top of that, yes, Logan Paul has been doing boxing a whole lot longer. So I think that kind of explains a lot of things in terms of how the fight played out, but also it explained why he had to do what he had to do in terms of reacting to the
Okay,
way that he did.
and you're going to be just a
Knew that he
little bit
wasn't going to win.
afraid of that person. I'm not saying you're not going to engage that person in a violent confrontation or in a sanctioned fight, but the one thing you got to understand is it does affect you a little bit. You'll think twice about looking at that person the wrong way or doing anything. But also, you also got to think, right? What did Nate Diaz do when he fought Jake Paul, right? He put him in the guillotine choke, which is quite symbolic because Nate Diaz put that Logan Paul lookalike on a guillotine choke and dropped him on his head in New Orleans, right? But then, of course, it's a boxing match, so he has to let go. Now, imagine Dylan has full force and full lock of Logan's neck because, in boxing, even though
And he
it's
did,
not a
by the
grappling
way.
sport, there's still a semi-grappling exchange going on, especially when guys start hugging each other, as they like to call it, or in the clinching position and whatnot. So imagine Dylan gets a hold of his neck, right? Is he going to let go, knowing that you got all this lawsuit going on? You got
So for those of you that have seen the fight and are watching this right now, do you know now why I'm playing this video? And by the way, I shot this particular video right here this morning. And this is what you get right here. I mean, not only did I predict the fight, but I predicted all the things that was going to happen, including the riot. But furthermore,
this guy trying to bankrupt you, and then you got this guy trying to ruin your reputation. But then, of course, it's all fair game because guess what? Dylan's sort of doing the same thing. But the only thing that he's doing, in all honesty, Dylan is just sort of showing the obvious, right? Okay, your fiance has been with this guy or that, and I have pictures, or it doesn't even say or hint any type of specific indication as to what exactly Nina.
but whatever that was obviously enough for Logan Paul and Nina to go and sue Dylan Danis, which, by the way, here's a question I need you guys to answer, right? If Logan Paul did not go through with the lawsuit of any kind, right? What would have happened? Would this fight be a lot more technical in a boxing sense where Dylan would actually try to outbox Logan? By the way, what I saw out of this fight, Dylan Dennis didn't look like the worst boxer out there. He looked all right. He looked like this was the plan that he was trying to do. He was trying to do in the beginning what Mayweather did to McGregor in their boxing match. If you notice, he walked them forward. What did Dylan Dennis do in this fight? Constantly walked them forward. And by the way, even in the Tommy Fury and KSI fight, there was just a lot of clinching going on. And perhaps maybe in the plan of KSI to do exactly that, or maybe in the plan of Tommy Fury to kind of keep it close range because of the fact that he just knew that he wasn't going to be able to fight the long range game with him. Right? So something to think about.
Agdal was doing, right? But he just posted pictures, but then it was enough for them to sue them. But still, it's quite a messy situation, right? So interesting enough. Also, Logan also wore a ski mask going into this fight, right? And I thought that was interesting because there's a cut in his face, right? Event you can't go into a boxing match with a mask, right? It's not WWE. I know Logan is a WWE superstar now. It's not Rey Mysterio. By the way, he did have a match with Rey Mysterio. He had a thing going on, I think, when Logan first entered the WWE.
Oh my goodness. So now do you understand why I'm playing this video? Who did Logan Paul call out after that fight? You know who he called out? Rey Mysterio, because he said that he wants to fight him for the United States Championship. And by the way, like most grown adults, I have not watched wrestling for a long time, so I don't know who the United States champion is at the current moment of time. But if that's Rey Mysterio, okay, makes sense. And Logan Paul went and called him out for that. So for
neither here or there. But yeah, he wore a mask, a ski mask, a baklava, as they call it, or sort of a ski mask of some sort. By the way, worn by most bank robbers. Um, but he's trying to cover up his face because he doesn't want to show his scar. Eventually, he's going to have to show it. Maybe it's one of those things where he's going to reveal the scar in his face and then do some sort of cartoonish thing where he's going to go out there and seek vengeance against Dylan Danis. At the same time, too, though, I think the interesting thing about this is where this fight is going to go afterwards in terms of their career. Will Dylan Danis still continue to be the biggest heel in the world, or continue to have this baby face run that he's been having with this Logan beef? Will Logan continue on with his prime energy drink, which he more than likely will? But then on top of that, how is that going to affect his business? How is that going to affect his standings with the WWE and his reputation? At the same time, it almost feels like no matter what the results is of this match.
Yeah, but guess what? So today he won. And the fact that Logan Paul won, I think the WWE is definitely going to give him a United States Championship matchup. Also, I really like that Logan was very honest with his assessment on being a boxer, right? He basically said that, you know what? WWE is my number one love. Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that Logan grew up wanting to ever be a WWE superstar. But the fact of the matter is that he wanted to be a boxer at first, but obviously you've seen what happened with the KSI fight. It didn't go too well. And then the Mayweather fight, yes, he did great, but it was an exhibition, so you can't really make much of it. But now Logan feels like he's found a home in the WWE because of the fact that, let's just be honest, right? From what I know about a lot of wrestling fans, they're very strange in ways that, let's say, are a little bit different than the other combat sports fans, such as the boxing heads or the MMA heads, or maybe even the Muay Thai heads or the Jiu-Jitsu heads. Way different community, right? In fact, so different that I think they would be a little bit more accepting on Logan Paul's lifestyle and these things that, let's say, Dylan Danis is criticizing him for, right? Well, now that all that is done, now that he's won, Dylan caused the riot. I don't think this hurts Dylan's status at all. Now, a lot of people are going to argue and say that's not the truth, that it does hurt him, that a lot of promoters are not going to want to mess with him anymore. They're not going to want to give him opportunities or anything like that. I beg to differ because you know what? They say in the public relations business or in the business of showbiz, right? Bad publicity is better than no publicity. So I want you to think about that, right? So all the people that are saying Dylan Danis is done, this is over for him, this and that, not so fast. Stand by on that because you got to think about a couple of things, right? Who was behind the commentary desk? It was Ariel Helwani. Now, I'm not the biggest Dylan Danis fan, okay? But also, you got to understand, neither is Ariel Helwani. So he's not going to say very favorable things about Logan Paul Dylan Danis. He's not going to say favorable things about him. And let's just be honest. Ariel Helwani also works for the WWE on the TNT side, which was known as BT Sport from the UK's sports channel, right? They cover WWE. And Ariel Helwani is a part of that. He goes out and covers WWE pay-per-views as much as he goes and covers UFC events. He covers MMA and UFC events from his MMA fighting podcast and MMA Hour shows that he does, right? He covers UFC in that way. But as a broadcaster, he covers, well, the WWE because he has a deal with BT Sport, which is now known as TNT. So more on this video right here.
Sure. It really doesn't matter, but at the same time, it doesn't hurt to win. So like and subscribe. And by the way, enjoy the fights.
So did you guys enjoy the fights? Yeah. Obviously, it's one of those situations, right, where it only matters if you win. Now, what does that say about Logan now that, let's say, he won this fight and Dylan Danis went out and caused the riot afterwards? The reality is that a lot of people are fickle, meaning that a week ago, many people were talking down on Logan Paul, saying that he's this, saying that he's that, saying that he's Will Smith, saying that he's all these types of things, saying that he's a sucker or this and that, right? Well, now that he won, this is the language that a lot of people are going to say. They're going to say something to the effect, well, you know what? This is what happens when you talk trash. When you talk trash, you get what's coming to you. Well, here's another thing you got to understand. Dylan Danis doesn't care because you know what? He doesn't respect boxing. He wanted to do this based on the fact that Logan Paul picked a boxing event and they were going to do a boxing event anyway. They just happened to want to add Dylan Danis into the mix. And then lo and behold, the fight was a co-main event. It didn't really mean much. But then they just decided, you know what? I'm going to go take a swipe at Logan's girl. I'm going to say these things. I'm going to go out and cause controversy. I'm going to create these innuendos of saying what she is and how she's going to be labeled to the world. And then everybody was on board with Dylan Danis. Well, now that the fight night happened, it's one of those situations where you're sort of disappointed because as the fight was going on, it was one of those situations that you're like, you know what? The hype of this fight does not match the intensity of what they had advertised going into it. It just didn't match at all. There's a lot of intensity in the trash talking. You even noticed in the press conference and in the face-offs, they had a cage going on, right? And even John Fury himself got in the cage in there with KSI because Tommy Fury requested that his dad would get in there in that little face-off box. And then what did John Fury do? He went and just started banging on the freaking plastic window that was in between the cages where the fighters were facing off, right? Creating this dramatic scene of, oh my God, these people are caged animals and they have to be separated because if they don't, then this is what's going to happen. And then you notice Dylan Danis was trying to get them to face off in out of the cage, right? They wanted to do a real face off where they were coming head to head and whatnot. And obviously, to the request of Logan Paul, he didn't want to do that. So a lot of people right now are going to turn Dylan Danis from a hero to a zero. Last week, he was a zero to a hero. Now this week, he's a hero to a zero. And now Logan is the hero of this whole entire thing. And the narrative changes. Why? Because people are fickle. They only care about the narrative of the winners. And guess what? I often cite a lot of historical battles in this particular content, in this podcast and whatnot, right? I always talk about wars and conflict and this and that. And the reason why I do that is because guess what? What is the best way to truly understand combat sports, right? Well, what is combat sports? In reality, combat sports is a metaphor for real life conflict. The only difference is that most of these guys get to go home with their limbs intact most times, okay, but not to the extent where you're getting shot at with bullets or getting bombed or anything like that, right? Or getting stabbed or none of that. It's a one-on-one fighting sport, but the metaphor and the consequences and let's say even the tribalism that goes into it is all the same. But just like that, the winner writes the history. At one point, Napoleon, and by the way, if you guys don't know, there's a movie coming out with Napoleon. The guy who played the Joker is going to be the guy that's playing Napoleon, right? If you look at that in some sort of strange parallels in some kind of way, right? Well, the reality is that the winners write the narratives. At one point, if Napoleon had ruled the world and conquered every nation that he wished, guess what would have happened? Napoleon would create this story that he is the greatest leader of all time. He is the greatest emperor of all time because at one point he was the emperor of France after he dethroned the kings and queens of that country and basically rode off into the sunset with the way that he did and tried to conquer other countries but failed. And because of that, we never look at Napoleon the way that we look at George Washington, the way that we look at, let's say, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Because guess what? The winners of the combat and the winners of the war get to write their own history and the way that they see it. Well, now, how does Logan look at this whole entire thing? He looks at this whole entire thing like, you know what? Dylan Danis is the devil. Even though there's a lot of people out there that look in reverse of that and say that Logan Paul is a devil. You look at what he did with the crypto scams that he had going on. the fact that he has this prime drink that may or may not be good for kids, but in reality, he wouldn't care either way. And that's just the reality of it, right? But the bottom line is, you have to understand that winners write the narrative, just like with Tommy Fury. Tonight, he won and he gets to write the narrative. What is the narrative that he gets to write? That YouTube boxers are no good and that they're not worthy to be in this world of professional boxing, but not so fast. Because let me ask you this, did KSI look like he didn't belong in there? I'll bet you, I didn't see the post fight commentary or the interviews and whatnot. So I don't know what Tommy Fury said, right? I just basically, after the fight, I just didn't really pay attention to anything after that. But I guarantee you, if Tommy Fury said it or not, there's a little bit of a respect factor that he would probably, let's say, give to KSI now. And he did it in a very difficult way, right? He didn't come out on top. Look, the way that Tommy Fury was looking at this fight, he's looking at it like, you know what? I am the boxer. This guy is the clown. I'm the real athlete. This guy is just a video gamer who played FIFA his whole entire life. But that's not what it looked like. It looked like KSI was a top prospect, an undefeated prospect, taking on another undefeated prospect, irregardless of the fact that KSI is an international superstar of some sort. So, once again, none of that matters, though, even though what I'm telling you is a fact. Because Tommy Fury won by split decision, by the way, and he got a point taken away from him. And even that, he can now use as some sort of, let's say, narrative to say that, you know what? He wouldn't even be close to the scorecards with me if it wasn't for that point deduction. Now he can literally go out and tell you that and say that. But that's the reality of combat sports in and of itself. It is the theater of the unknown, and it is the theater of the winner's narrative. So that's one thing you always have to remember about this whole thing. It is the theater of those that won and can write their own narratives. And the losers, well, they have to go out and explain themselves as to, well, why this and that didn't happen, or why this. It's very similar. Again, I always go back to war and conflict to try to make you understand how I view the world of combat sports, right? What do I mean by the winner gets to write the narrative and the loser just gets to complain? Let me explain to you what that means. You ever heard of people that have been colonized or conquered and things of that nature, and then they talk about reparation? Well, guess what? That's what they have to do, is complain about their circumstances that led them to their loss, or led them to, let's say, their ancestors not having the upper hand on the enemy of some sort. And then the reason why history has shifted in the way that it has. So that's the reality of combat sports today. That's the reality of combat sports forever. And that's the reality of war and everything else that deals with conflict around the world. Now, you take a look at this situation with Palestine and Israel. What's going on right now, right? Well, if you ask anybody who, let's say, supported the whole ordeal or what had happened, they would tell you that this was a very successful mission. That not only was it a successful mission, it was well-deserved for them to get what was coming to them. This is what the people would tell you that supported that whole victory of what had happened in that particular thing. Now, the loser of that whole entire event, which is Israel, guess how they have to explain this whole thing? Well, you know what? Our guys were like this. The parliament and the government of Israel was divided the way that America was divided. And because these two nations that are so attached with each other, being that divided that they are, now they created this mess and this series of mistakes that led to this situation. So now they're just constantly explaining or constantly complaining. They're constantly calling these guys whatever it is that they want to call them in order to feel better about the situation. Now, look, in no way am I saying any of this to create some sort of glee as to what had happened. I'm very neutral in this particular subject. But what I'm trying to tell you and what I'm trying to explain to you are examples of why people are always going to look to the winners the way that they're never going to look at the losers in any conflict, whether it's combat sports or the actual theater of war. So I hope you guys enjoyed this content. Like and subscribe. And I hope you guys enjoy the fights. Right now, I'm currently watching the Edson Barbosa versus Sadiq Youssef fight. I'm going to do a reaction on that sometime down the road, sometime down this weekend of some sort. I'm going to watch the entire card as well to give you the full breakdown. But this was an amazing card nonetheless. And I'm very glad that I was able to catch it at some capacity because of the craziness that had gone on. At first, I was like, you know what? I'm probably just going to go out and skip seeing this fight, to any degree, because it's just not a fight that's worth it, right? Next week, what do you got? You got Islam Makhachev taking on Volkanovski for the second time in 1 year. And then on top of that, now you got Khamzat Chimaev taking on Usman. I'm like, man, you know what? I could skip out this one and just wait next week. But lo and behold, I'm kind of glad that I saw the riot went down the way that it did in the Dylan Danis versus Logan Paul fight. Because for the lack of credibility, for the lack of reality, and for the lack of everything that is decent that came about with this fight, the one thing that it offered you was exactly the thing that they guaranteed that they could offer you, which is what? Pure entertainment. So it was a great night of fights nonetheless. So like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you again soon. Inshallah.